Hello, Akash.
Hi, Susan.
Trying to share my screen. Okay, today I'm just going to share my browser. We'll see how that goes.
Sounds good.
Because I feel like the notifications and other things keep popping up and it'll be recorded and it's not very good.
Yeah.
Okay, I tried to click on share. Right, oh, two people are entering. Admit. Louise and Nathan.
Okay.
Yeah, Akash, if you see anyone in the wanting to join, like in the lobby, sometimes I don't see it. If you see it, let me know.
Okay. How would you even tell? Is it in the participants tab or?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a great question. Like I used to share my screen, so you'll be able to see everything. But now, if I'm just sharing a browser, do you see?
No, we just see a black box where you might. I don't know what that is, but.
Interesting. So, sorry. What do you see on the?
Yeah, where your mouse is hovering over it.
I
It's
see.
a black box. So.
Got it. I think it's because it's not a part of the browser, so it kind of just hides it.
Yeah.
Hello, Louise. Hello, Nathan.
Hello.
On the agenda today, I have reviewing some of our open PRs, and also Akash was doing a performance analysis of the Ratify workflow to optimize the 3 seconds that we have to work with. And Sajay was saying that he was going to follow up with the Azure policy people to see if we have any additional incoming requirements. And I've been working on the 6-store package, cosign package update, and I haven't resolved it yet, just wanted to share my learning. Anyone else have any agenda to add?
Nope.
Okay, sounds good. We'll get started then. Oh, Jimmy's here. Yep, so we'll start with the Kubernetes secret auth provider PR. Let's see if there's any updates there. Yeah, I see Tejo have added a comment about if the secret value is updated, what would we do? Akash, do you want to add any details?
Yeah. So yeah, it was actually a really good point. So prior to this, what I was essentially doing was on pod startup, it would, when it registered the auth provider, it would basically pull all the secrets, and then subsequent calls to provide credentials to various registries would use those pulled secrets to query for the credentials. But of course, if the secrets have been updated after, then it may not be reflected. So now I changed it so it pulls it every time provide is called. The only concern I think that we were talking about earlier too, Susan, is that we are currently also caching the registry client. So if we see a request for an image of a registry, we grab the credentials from the Kubernetes secret, create the registry client, and then cache the registry client. If the Kubernetes secret changes, the credentials change in between that time, it would already be in the registry client cache. So we have functionality so that there's like an expiry date that we can set on the credential, but in this case, we don't really know when it expires. We could set some sort of arbitrary like 1-day expiry on the Kubernetes secret credential registry client, and then it would be forced to go through that whole process again. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure how we should handle that. Yes. My suggestion in the short term is just to add a expiry date on it. If anyone else has any other suggestions.
Akash, we also talked about like so first question is how, given could be related to the timeout, how expensive is it to recreate and read from the secret every time?
Yeah, so I did a little bit of timing because I was also concerned about that. It seems to be pretty fast, and I'm pretty sure it's probably because you're just making a call to the control plane. So I'm seeing that it's taking around 50 to 100 milliseconds, which is fairly quick. I haven't tried a scenario where there's like a bunch of secrets that we're pulling. I can follow up and try with that too and see if it linearly scales up. Then it might pose an issue in that case, but
yeah, I think it's good to have an initial implementation, and we can just incrementally improve on that and in the future.
Sounds good.
Yep. So I guess this is ready to review then.
Yeah, I think it's ready for another round of review. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. And once we merge this PR, is there a scenario that we will unblock? Like, is there anyone waiting for this?
Not that I know of, but it's kind of a pretty like stable scenario, basic scenario. So it's good to have it. Yeah.
Cool.
One general question. How do we typically like add validations or tests to these changes? Like, do we have like a test project or?
So there are, so I've been writing some unit tests for it, but I don't think we have like a full test project for this.
Is it possible to have like a GitHub action that runs through the vanilla scenario?
Nathan, do you know if it's possible or?
Probably.
Or can we call Nathan's GitHub action?
Yeah, I mean, that could potentially work. I mean, you'll kind of start running into some weird circular dependencies.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it would probably need to be something a little bit different, since the action is going to be
yeah, but we can log an issue to track that.
Yeah.
Is it common, Nathan? Have you seen other open source projects have like tests at at an integration level, or most projects are just using unit test?
I think unit tests are probably the most common. Yeah, I think it's just kind of generally whatever is easiest to kind of run for whatever platform you've chosen is kind of what they aim for. So
Yeah, because it's interesting. I mean, we are implementing all these auth providers. Do we feel like unit tests is enough? I feel like we should probably have some sort of end-to-end. And again, it might be a separate discussion just to discuss what framework we want to use. So we might want to put some thought here.
Jimmy, have you seen other open source projects with integration test?
I don't do a lot of open source upstream work. So I'm actually trying to break into it myself and sharpen my Go skills. So Yeah, I mean, if it was Java, I'd be able to help you out, but
No problem. We will have a look in, like, say, Gatekeeper, for example.
or any of the upstream Kubernetes. I mean, like kubectl probably has some stuff in there that would help out.
Yep, we'll take a look. Thanks. I see Sajid just joined. Okay.
Maybe we can ask Sajay.
Oh yeah, sure. Sajid, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yeah, we were talking about the Kubernetes authentication provider PR, and Luis brought up the point that do we run integration test for like our different authentication providers? So we're just wondering, is it common for
It is.
like, do people use unit tests, or do they usually have a vanilla integration test in the open source world?
I think as at least from, okay, this is putting on the Azure hat. We should make sure this thing doesn't break either way. Let me have a chat with Lucky as to what the Helm community does, and we should probably like follow a similar pattern. But for all purposes to unblock ourselves, let's at least open an item, and we can validate the test coverage for the workload identity for Azure and see how it actually works.
Yeah, sounds good. I will open a tracking item. Okay, then next open PR is the read the certificate from a directory. I've updated the implementation, and I've just added a comment to say that currently the implementation would just ignore the file and just move to the next one. It's safer because I don't know what other people will keep in the same directory. Like, do people feel it's okay just to ignore the non-certificate file and just read only the method would just return the certificates?
I remember Eric's our consideration here was that you are configuring this manually, and we are not randomly globbing from different parts of the system. So it's okay to assume that if the file cannot be understood, we just move on. Because there is an explicit step that the directory is configured, or is a well-known directory, right? It's not something that we don't use something like we use a home directory or something, so it's fine.
Yeah, so currently, yeah, we read the certificate in, we append it, and if there's no certificate error, we just go to the next file.
Sounds good. Quick question.
Yep, go ahead.
You're appending, you want to append only if there is no error, right?
Yes. So move this to the other after the if. Sure, I'll change that.
Okay.
Okay, the next item is Sajid, since you mentioned you'll only be here for the first half of the meeting, and last week we talked about the Azure policy integration. Do you have any updates on like additional details there?
Yes, maybe I can share it with folks here. We are considering portions of how to enable this lighting up inside Azure, like through one of the key scenarios. I think the Azure implementation, what they want is being able to specify that when you deploy something, you want a signature on it, and how do we ensure that the signature doesn't expire and things like that. So we don't have an immediate plan on ETA, but from a roadmap perspective, that's what something we'll do is which the auth provider that is specified here, we use the CSI driver, and there would be native policy integration to support things like enforcing presence of signatures on before deployment at least, and audit as a part of post deployment continuously. So this is roughly the roadmap that we want to go after. Does that help?
Yes. Any questions from other folks? Because I've had some other conversation with Sajay talking about the Azure policy.
So by audit, do we mean we just do a post-deployment validation, so we don't block deployment, or?
This is more like the Kubernetes audit events. Like we can, so I'll give you an example. The scenario is we have deployed with a valid signature, and the signature expires over time. During pod scale out or anything like that, you don't want to fail the deployment, right? But you do want to indicate, you want to have an audit trail saying that the signature or the scan result is invalid at this point. So operators can either add a signature or rescan it or update their deployments as needed. So it's a common operator practice where you don't break what's running, but you have an indication and alerts indicating that there is an action to be taken. And you have some window before compliance kind of like comes and says, no, you should stop this, right? And we go through exception process and things. It's similar. So
and this is just for that specific scenario where the signature expires,
right? Or a vulnerability scan. For example, you say that your scan policy can be, I want 0 critical vulnerabilities, and maybe in a week your software has a critical vulnerability, and so that actually does fire an audit event saying that, hey, you're out of compliance in some way. You need to either update the image or update the pod with a new image or something like that. You need to kick off a new deployment in some way and take down this old thing that is running. So we need to kind of figure that story out. So for that, you need constantly, the basic point here is you need to be able to re-verify on a cadence. And I was speaking to Susan before this call, which is we have an item to do constant verification with a configurable cadence that says re-verify a certain set of assets that have been deployed before, and that's something that we need to do. And we need to persist this information somewhere as well. So that's the. I think that's, I don't know. Does that kind of roughly describe it?
Yeah, no, this helps. Now the other thing that so there's also the vulnerability scan service, right?
Right.
Are they not able to, or are they could potentially also, are they going to be able to leverage Ratify to do this type of checks, or is it a separate?
Yes. So there was a previous conversation where I think the scanning scenario, we spoke with the scanning service team, and I think the feedback was they see this as an opportunity to integrate and kind of see what they can contribute back here.
Okay.
That conversation has started, but I don't know exactly where that might go. But clearly we know that this is where signature validation will happen. And SNCC is one, they still have to standardize on their scan format and things like that. There are multiple scan formats existing today, right? There's SNCC, there is Azure's own proprietary format, and I think there's OpenScan or something like that also being pitched. So it's a little fluid at this point.
So for the customer right now, the flow is to have two separate services doing scanning different things.
Unfortunately, yes. We want to be able to unify that. We don't want multiple add-ons and multiple endpoints open up. But until this solves all the other problems, I don't think we'll get to that yet.
Okay.
So I had a question. Your conversation is it basically around Azure policies?
No. So, okay, actually that's right now. The ask is from the Azure policy team of how to integrate, but we don't, at least the goal is inside Ratify, we don't want to put anything that is Azure's policy specific. We want to be able to configure it with being able to run this in some environment with a certain set of configurations. What we want to do is take out those configs. I'll give you a specific example. If the customer wants to author some policy saying that I want to keep my verification scan updated every 6 hours or 12 hours, I want to be able to rescan. or I want to be able to run this on a daily basis. That is something we can introduce into Ratify as a configuration. The cloud provider can somehow flow this configuration down in any form. Like, for example, in Azure, they have this concept of add-ons is what they kind of like inject into and bring these components in and light them up. So like Hera or anything like that comes in as an add-on. So Gatekeeper also comes in as an add-on. And the add-on is responsible for translating the Azureisms, the cloud-specific implementations, down to the component level, like the integration points are there. So that ask is what we want to understand. Like, what do we want to do for Azure, and what configuration do they want? And if AWS or anything else has similar configurations, we want to bring that in also, so that we can just open up the surface area as needed.
Yeah, that sounds right. I mean, we on the ECAS side, we have add-ons as well, and so I mean, the term add-on is somewhat universal between at least the two of us here. But the thing that I was going to bring up was, because I wasn't clear on the policy piece, and also you had mentioned, you don't want this to trigger a failure if you're trying to scale out or whatever. If you're looking at how the gatekeeper thing would work, though, the way that I envisioned it working was, you could the gatekeeper policy could be written for, let's say a deployment resource. It could be written for a pod resource as well. So, but it, would be like a create an update on a pod or a create an update on a deployment. I don't think you'd need it for delete. So I guess scaling out would fire that, create policy if you had it set that way.
Right. Let's say your app never scaled out for a week or a month.
And then your signature is no longer valid, right?
Correct. And you could have scan results that are vulnerable, and you want to kind of indicate it. So I think the work item that we're tracking here is, how do we make sure there's configuration inside Ratify that would go back and re-verify it? For example, if the pod dies and it comes back, and we have to take care of some amount of persistence somewhere. So how do we persist this information so that it's possible to ensure that if the user is configured every 24 hours, I want to make sure that things are valid and get me an audit result out. That's something that Ratify needs to solve, like keep track of it.
Well, does it need to solve that, or does it, is that a use case that your
add-on can do?
Your gatekeepers and Cavernos can do? I mean, because Gatekeeper supports the idea of audit policies, right? Non-enforcing audit policies. So does Caverno. They call them background scans, but same thing. So that would be and the policies are virtually the same. All right. So for Gatekeeper, at least, an audit policy would use similar Rego.
Right. So we could, I mean, for me, I think if we decide to at least document it, this is how you enable signature verification on a regular basis with some cadence, and we kind of stitch Gatekeeper through. As long as we have the docs and we have the templates all bound and validated, and like you said, integration tested, but make sure that this is there, that might be good enough, and we don't solve the problem inside Ratify. That's totally a feasible option.
Okay, cool.
I'm only talking about the user story. Implementation is still something I have no idea.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, you're right.
But that's definitely a good input. So what I'm hearing is that we could just leverage Gatekeeper's background jobs, or
their audit,
their audit jobs. Okay.
I mean, that's the way that I see it, because the policies themselves, the Rego portion of the policies would make the external data call just like the enforcement portion of the policy, using Rego. So I think it should work. Just a matter of testing and making sure, and understanding what the cadence of that audit is, which I think you can adjust, actually.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I don't think we should reinvent the wheel, because if the users already have something similar, then just attaching it to that makes things much more easier and less concept overhead, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other way would be writing some other, validator or controller type thing And I'm not sure personally, I like to reduce the sprawl if possible. So if I've already got Gatekeeper running
Right.
as an operator in my cluster.
Right. That makes sense.
I was just thinking about the scenario, Jimmy. Like if Gatekeeper say invokes Ratify on a cadence, then does Gatekeeper store the result, or do they just log it somewhere?
It gets logged. I mean, you can control, I think, how it gets logged. I need to look into that a little more, but the policy working group was working on a policy reports type of artifact that actually they were also talking about like converting that to OSCAL at some point for folks who need OSCAL output. So it'd be interesting to, I don't know where the Gatekeeper project is with regards to the policy report artifact that the policy working group is speccing, but it'd be interesting to see how close they are and if it's not already there, and I can reach out to them to find out. But because that would make the most sense, is that this thing would either, well, you could have it show up in logs, but something like this should, a violation like this should show up in a policy report. An artifact that you could then query in the, inside the cluster, or even have it sent outside the cluster maybe.
Yeah, very interesting. Thanks. And does AWS have something similar to Azure policy? Like, is that also a use case for AWS?
So we have other tools like we've got guard duty that looks at logs. We've got AWS config and AWS inspector that where you can write specific policies to detect when things are misbehaving or misconfigured or drift, so to speak. I don't think it's exactly, I mean, it amounts to adding policies, but it's not like a centralized policy tool like it sounds like Azure policy is. I've never used Azure policy. I had a brief conversation about it with a couple folks from Azure years ago, so I don't know a lot about it. Sorry.
No problem. Thanks for the information. Any other comments about Azure policy, or we can move on to the performance analysis? Okay. Akash, do you want to go through the analysis?
Yep, sure. Let me share my screen.
Sounds good. I might have to make you a co-host, make a host. Yep, you should be able to share now.
All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So just starting off from last week, we had kind of discussed going in and doing some timing benchmark analysis on the Ratify with Azure workload identity auth provider flow, because currently we're seeing that we sometimes intermittently fail to complete the entire validation process within the 2.8 second limit, and basically wanted to go in and see which components are taking the longest of that. So just to start, I broke down the entire flow into all of the different components, both from the code execution side as well as the bolded text or the incoming or outgoing HTTP requests as well. So basically, when Gatekeeper sends its validation request to Ratify via the external data webhook, that's when the timer starts. And the first thing that we do from request-wise is that we need to essentially exchange the AAD token which we have previously gotten via a previous exchange on pod startup, and get an ACR refresh token. So that would be step 5 here. The step 4, which is above it, is actually referring to the AAD token exchange that is required in order to take the token file, which is injected into a pod on pod startup, and exchange that for a container registry scoped AAD token. And because it's only scoped at the container registry level, we can basically cache this AAD token and use it later on when the actual provide function is called for the credentials during the actual validation webhook process. So if in this flow, we're going to assume that we already have the AAD token cached and it is valid. So once we have confirmed that it's valid, we'll proceed with the ACR token exchange, and ACR will return to us a refresh token, which can be used as the password in the credentials that we pass on to ORAS. So once we pass on these credentials to ORAS, the first thing that we do through ORAS is we need to resolve the subject descriptor. So we take the image name with the repo and the registry host name, pass that on to ORAS. ORAS makes a request to ACR to resolve the subject descriptor, and then ACR returns back this the resolved subject descriptor to ORAS. After that, using the resolved subject descriptor, ORAS needs to take that subject descriptor and query ACR for the list of refer artifacts that refer to this subject. And we do that via ORAS Discover. So ORAS Discover will return back to us a list of these refers artifacts. Now that we have the list of artifacts that are in contention, ORAS will, for each of those artifacts, it will send a request to get the reference artifacts manifest. And it does that by using an ORAS graph walk, which essentially takes the rooted subject and explores the entire artifact tree in order to find the corresponding artifact manifest, and then returns that manifest. Once this operation is complete, it takes the manifest of the artifact, finds each of the blobs in that manifest, and then it needs to go and request from ACR the actual download content of that blob. So the process, the heavy lifting of all of the validation timing-wise ends kind of once we have the downloaded blobs in the ORAS local cache. After that, Notary takes over. Notary basically will take the blob content and verify the signature, and then return the verification result all the way back to Gatekeeper, which ends the entire process. So all of these steps have to occur within that 2.8 second window. Now, breaking it down into what is taking the longest, we can kind of see a sample failure and success case of these operations. So if we start with the success case here, the first heavy operation is requesting ACR to get the refresh token, which we can then use as the password and send that credential over to ORAS. So in this case, it takes between, I'm saying 400 to 600 milliseconds. It just kind of depends on the instance that was running. And then after that, the part where you have to resolve the subject descriptor, you can see it takes 407 seconds, 7 milliseconds. And then after that, we need to get the list of refers. That takes approximately 400 milliseconds. And then the next operation, which is actually the largest operation, is the finding the reference manifest and returning that back. And that operation involves walking the tree. And because it has to walk the tree, it's a heavier operation. It involves multiple resolutions and can be multiple calls to ORAS Discover depending on the level of the tree. And then the final operation is to actually download the blob. So in this case, we were able to complete the whole thing in 2,500 milliseconds approximately. In the failure case, what we see is that the operations, for the most part, all are taking a little bit longer, and as a result, it times out. This actually ends at about 2800 is at this point. So the context is exceeded and we have to terminate the operation as a result. And now to compare it to without any of the authentication. So this is previous to any workload identity. So there's no ACR token exchange actually happening because we already have the credentials stored locally. So it skips the first step. But as you can see, the rest of it is gonna stay basically the same. So the actual ORS operations are the ones that are pretty heavy. And in fact, this third one, which is binding the matching reference manifest and returning that, seems to take the longest out of all of them. So based off of these benchmarks, I was able to, there's a few things to note. So the first thing is that these benchmark and timings are based off of the first attempt. So the first attempt is when we are trying to grab the access, the refresh token from ACR, because the registry is unknown. We haven't cached the client credentials on the Ratify end. So that's why if it does take longer than usual, any of the operations, then we're going to time out. But if the user retries again, because we already have the credential, we skip the first step, and I see that it basically always succeeds in that case. The other thing to notice is that currently this scenario is the most basic Ratify scenario that anyone who uses Ratify would use, because there's a single refer store, there's a single verifier, there's a single artifact with a signature with a single blob in it. So it's all at the most basic level. So if we're failing at this point, this is definitely an issue. And now drilling into the two operations which are kind of taking the longest, we can see one is the reference manifest matching on the ORS side, and another one that does take time depending on the actual attempt that was taken is also the blob content download. The reference manifest grab is taking a long time because it has to walk the entire tree, and the current version of ORS that we use serially walks the tree, so it doesn't have any sort of concurrency built into it. So that is also one way that we can, if the artifact tree gets heavier, we can avoid this issue growing out of control in the future. And ORS v2, which is the new ORS Go module, actually addresses some of those shortcomings and implements its own concurrent graph walking function. The second thing with this ORS implementation is that there's a known issue where in order for the graph to walk at each level, we call an ORS discover, and ORS discover involves resolving each of the different refers at each level. And so in order to resolve that descriptor, it uses Docker resolver, and Docker resolver uses containerd, and containerd actually has logic built in where it will, for any sort of descriptor resolution, it'll first call the v2 manifest path to the container registry, and if that fails, which it will because the refer manifest is not considered a traditional manifest, then it will, after the failure occurs, then it will retry with the blob path, which will then succeed. So there's a little bit of some round trips, extra round trips with failures happening that could account for some more latency involved there. Yeah, and then the final thing is that we, on the Ratify end, we don't have a lot of concurrency built into it. So if there are multiple refer stores, multiple verifiers, multiple artifacts that we need to verify, we do them all serially. So there's no like multiple processes doing it in parallel. So we could also look into adding some concurrency there. But yeah, these are just kind of my initial thoughts and then what the benchmarks have found. So any thoughts or questions?
I think it's leading more towards having to solve this in some kind of pre-flight mechanism rather than during deployment, right? Maybe I can, one thing I can offer here is let's talk to the Helm community and see what they think as mechanisms for introducing any kind of pre-flight validation. What do customers do? And we can also reach out to the community side also over time. What's the recommended way? I think gatekeeper's timeout is pretty hard for a good enough reason. From last discussion with Sartak and Rita, they were clearly that it would break the cluster if there is configurations and it doesn't work for most of the default cases. We want to keep the timeout low. So that seems like a non-pursuable option, but if it's some kind of a upstream change that we have to do, I think we have to think about how pre-flight validation might happen. Akash, do you need help getting some time with folks on the community side?
Yeah, that would be great. I'm not really sure of anyone on that side. So.
Yeah, I'll help there, so that we can have this discussion and have the gatekeeper folks know that this is the model that we might like to proceed. And given that Eric is kind of on vacation at least till April 20th, this portion will be a little slow, and we live with this as is for the next maybe 6 to 8 weeks, because it's not going to get solved. Even if we do another API, it's not going to get solved very quickly. So one thing we can do is keep that on the back burner, and let's start the conversation with having input from both the gatekeeper folks and from the community side as to what is the path that they would recommend we proceed with. I think there's opinions from this group, but it'd be good to kind of get their input also, which way to go.
One of the explorations you mentioned here is potentially having Auras V2 help. How do we have any kind of confidence that this would cut down the sort of the graph traverse basically time? Should we invest some time looking into upgrading?
Maybe I can talk about some strategy here. I think my first goal was to prove that this thing works, right? Like from signature validation end to end, we can get something up, even despite knowing the risk of the gatekeeper 3-second timeout. But given the amount of progress we've made, it's now easy to have the conversation saying that this 3-second timeout has become an important enough problem for us to solve, and we can take a different path. And I think why I'm saying that is pre-flight validations would probably be the better bet in most cases, because today you expect the signature to be there and local, and maybe you can even get them fast within 3 seconds. But the moment you have things like CRL validation in the pipe, you're going to some other entity altogether, and that's undetermined amount of time. And you want to be able to run that in some manner which is not constrained to just 3 seconds. I mean, so over time, this is going to be a problem that we would have to solve, not just for the specific 3-second and moving Auras to a new API. We could even bundle the signatures, pre-deploy, pre-cache, and do a bunch of things. But just having a consistent API, like this is what pre-flight validation looks like, kick off the validation, and then Ratify just becomes a cache of yay and nay, and it can do a background verification depending on things like what we just discussed, which is gatekeeper audit policy or their audit cadence and whatnot. So that's where Ratify might add value going forward. So I don't know whether moving to any optimized version of APIs is going to actually keep us with an SLA. Because I don't think time is the criteria here. It's more like we want to be able to reliably determine whether the container is good or bad. You don't want to run bad stuff. And if it kind of like fails because we couldn't get signatures and the failure rate is very high, you're always going to have a first time failure rate. And that seems like a bad experience.
Sajay, can you expand on the pre-flight validation in the deployment workflow? Where about does it kick in?
I have no idea. That's why I'm hoping that we talk to the Kubernetes folks and ask them what is the recommended pattern to kind of like proceed with this. And if we have to, because there are many injection points, right? Like there's pod create, pod scale out. Where all should we get in? Should be something we have to be cautious about without having to introduce new API surfaces as much as possible, or without buy-in from the community.
Yep, sounds good. We will learn more from the Kubernetes folks.
This was great analysis, Akash. Thanks for writing this up. I think this could serve as a good data point also with that for that conversation with Kubernetes team.
Yes.
In terms of, we were talking about migrating to Orosco anyway. It's probably, would that still be the next logical step, or how would we?
Yeah, that doesn't change it. I would say just go ahead and migrate, because
Okay.
the library was rewritten, it removed containerd, it made a bunch of optimizations. The thing that's missing is the file target. So chat with the ORAS folks as to when the file target is there, because you do need a cache, right? Whether it comes through Gatekeeper or whether it comes through something else, you do need some way to cache the signatures or any other artifacts. So that doesn't change.
I think we can get away with it because the current ORS one is also using the OCI target for that.
Okay, I don't know, but just check with.
I'll check with them.
It's your item. So
okay.
if you're not blocked, then great.
Okay.
Okay. Oops, I need to drop off. I'll catch up with everybody.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye, Sajay.
Thank you,
Sajay. Akash, since you have the screen, do you want to click into the cosign package link?
This one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, I just linked. So this is so we have the dependency bot flagging that we need to upgrade from the current version of 1.1 to the latest version of 1.5. And it breaks, there's two build breaks. In the first one is when we try to retrieve the signature, and the other build break is when we try to validate the signature. And this specific breaking change calls out that they did some refactoring. And I believe because we're just implementing like the basic cosign plugin to validate the concept, I think all we need is the verify image signature part, not the image attestation. Is that correct, Akash? Are you familiar with the plugin?
No, I'm not, because I think Eric was the one who had done this pre me joining the project, unfortunately. I can look into this more. I don't have much context on it.
Yeah, no problem. I think I would just update it so it'll, instead of calling verify, I'll call the verify image signatures.
Okay.
They've also updated the interface a little bit, so I'll just like update accordingly to make sure
I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and they also have some like interesting features that we're probably not going to support right now, but in the future we can add the support if needed. Like they're adding SBOM validation and some other image attestation support, which looks interesting, but some of the features are hiding behind like feature flag. They have like a cosign experiment flag. And of course, in our plugin today, in our configuration, we're not, we don't have a configuration to say, do we want to use experimental bits or not? We'll just keep everything basic for now. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me.
Okay. Yeah, that's all I wanted to wanted to check with that. But I'm currently running into an error, like without making any modification. I've tried to verify the cosine signature, but I'm running into like an invalid character error. Like I might follow up with you offline, Akash.
Sure, yeah, I can try to help out there. Yep.
And in our payload, in the Ratify payload, if we say is success true, does
Yes.
it mean the validation is successful or is the run successful? Like what does is success true means?
Yeah, I believe it's that the validation was successful, not that it was like it's correct or not, which is really confusing too. I think we need to look at that, because there's certain times when the certificate will not properly be loaded, or it won't validate correctly, but it'll say is success is true still, because the process succeeded, but not the
Exactly.
Yeah, so
Not saying it was a good image.
yes, yeah,
Got it.
yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we should, I will log an item to improve that property,
Yeah,
because I was really confused. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
it's successful.
Yeah.
So what does the image is good property look like in the report? I wonder if we have a sample of that.
I think the best way to tell is to actually look at the rego and see what it's looking for. Let me see.
Okay.
Yeah, because the rego will tell us what it's using to determine if it passes or fails.
Yeah, no problem. I'll take a look. Yeah, that's everything we have on the agenda. If there's no more items, we can close the meeting early. I don't know how. Oh, okay, it's already 4:52. I guess we can all get 8 minutes back.
You need like a gavel or something you can bang and say this meeting's closed, or
Yeah, like a Toastmaster have like a hammer sort of thing. Like you know, like let's begin. Pung. Yep. All right.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. Just before we close, I just want to check if there's anyone wants to add any agenda for next week.
Not for me.
Okay, sounds good. I'll add items as they come up then. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Jimmy.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.